all the days, from this day to that, for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
To Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. I kind of want to dive into a little tech news to start off. Checking all the different media sources out there, including Drudge. Came across this article. Study AI can predict lifespans of patients by looking at organs. And I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to kind of cover my take on this. And this says, Adelaide, Australia, scientists from the University of Adelaide have created an artificial intelligence program that can predict a person's lifespan just by looking at images of their organs. The research recently published in the Journal of Scientific Reports saw the scientists use an AI program to analyze medical images of 48 patients' chests, accurately measuring whether or not they died in the next 5 years with a 69% accuracy. Now I want to kind of point out, that's not, that's not good accuracy to, base, a decision on. Or should you really, I believe, take a 69% accuracy to heart? Yeah, it's close to 70%, but, this is your life too. And that's kind of what this article is talking about, the lifespan of a person. I'll kind of get into that a little bit more here in a second. But it says here, scientists have created an AI program that can accurately predict a person's lifespan just by looking at images of the organs. Dr. Luke Oakton Rayner, a PhD student at the university and lead author of the study, says in a school press release that predicting the future of a patient's health will better allow doctors to work up treatment plans that best suit each patient much faster than by previous methods. As medical practitioners are generally unable to look inside the body and measure the health of each organ. He points to a process the computer undertakes called deep learning, which allows the machine to accurately read images. Although the study only a small sample of patients was used, our research suggests that the computer has learned to recognize the complex imaging appearances of diseases, something that requires extensive training for human experts, he says. Now I want to read one part back to you. It says here, predicting the future of patients' health will better allow doctors to work up treatment plans that best suit each patient. Now let's kind of combine that with the nickname death panels, end of life, decision making. Well, the AI said that you would die somewhere around 49. You're 48. Um, Never mind that with a little bit of treatment, you might be able to live to 57, even that um, again, 69% accuracy, even at 80%. You know, um, they can say, because the AI really says you don't have much time, we can't afford to, give you the surgery because it's going to really be a waste of our energy and time because the AI said you're going to die. Think think about that when you kind of read that, how it can be used two different ways. This says, you'll die by 49. Let's do something to get you to, 99. There, or it could be used as, hey, it says you're going to die at 49, you're 48, you're having problems, we're not going to do surgery, and you're just going to die. And you combine that with these people that really believe in population control, and it really goes downhill from there. Um, Again, that's up at Drudge right now. I also had another article here. I think I'll get into this one here a little bit, but it's basically Google is already late to China's AI revolution. Actually, I'll just go ahead and cover it right now. Sitting on a stage in Wuzhen, China, a historic city up on the river from Shanghai, Google chairman Eric Schmidt described what he called the age of intelligence, but he wasn't talking about human intelligence. He meant machine intelligence. He trumpeted the rise of deep neural networks and other techniques that allow machines to learn tasks largely on their own, either by finding patterns in vast amounts of data or through their own trial and error. At Google, using a sweeping software tool called TensorFlow, engineers have built deep learning systems that. Give me a second here. I believe something might try to play on me here. Whoops, gotta get rid of that. Allows it um, build deep learning systems that can identify faces and objects and photos, recognizing commands spoken into smartphones and translate one language into another. Schmidt called this the biggest technological change of his lifetime. Then he mentioned China's three largest internet companies, um, Baidu, Tencent, and Alibaba. All three, he said, could benefit from TensorFlow, which Google open sourced about 18 months ago, sharing it with the world at large. All of them would be better off if they used TensorFlow, Schmidt said. On the Chinese internet giants, he said the software could predict what people want to purchase, help target ads, and even decide who should get a line of credit. They can use TensorFlow to study the patterns of their business. They can use technology to serve their customers faster. Delivered amidst the week-long Go match between Chinese Grandmaster TG and AlphaGo, a seminal machine created by Google's DeepMind artificial intelligence lab. Schmidt's words were not hyperbole. Deep learning and related technologies are fundamentally changing the way Google works, and they will change so many other companies, even entire industries, over the next several years. The trouble is that Schmidt undersells how far these technologies have already spread beyond the walls of Google. The age of intelligence has moved ahead much farther than he admits, especially in China. Schmidt's word accurately described the enormous power of modern neural networks. And they showed the enormity of Google's progress and ambition in the area. But if you read between the lines, they also showed the limits of the company's ambitions, namely China. Though many in the West paint the deep learning revolution as a phenomenon driven by the big U.S. internet companies, China is hardly far behind. AI, not just American, Chinese companies like Baidu, Tencent, and Alibaba are already using these same technologies as are U.S. giants like Facebook, Microsoft, and Amazon. Google took an early lead mainly because it bought up so much of the key talent, but many others have embraced deep learning in big ways, including the largest internet companies in China. It's easy to fall into the old stereotype, the copy to China stereotype, that China is so far behind and they're just importing everything. But that's out of date, says Adam Coates, the American born AI researcher who now oversees Baidu's Silicon Valley AI lab. As far back as 2014, Baidu started an internal research lab it called the Institute of Deep Learning, showing its own extreme ambitions. Now it runs several other labs, including the 200-person outpost in Silicon Valley. All told, the company employs more than 1,800 researchers and engineers who work on AI, including driverless cars and other robotics, as well as many online services. Deep learning technology is already driving everything from Baidu search engine to the company's image and speech recognition services. More than 18 months ago, the Chinese giant publicly revealed that it was using neural networks to help target online ads. One of the particular tasks Schmidt said TensorFlow could help them with. Tencent recently opened a stateside AI lab of its own, and like Alibaba and Baidu, it's now a regular part of the international AI conference circuit that plays such an important role in the process or progress of AI research in academia and across the industry. Beijing hosted an international conference of machine learning in 2015. You can read the rest of that one at wired.com. But with all this AI, and like the article I wrote about how, it might be able to predict someone's lifespan. Well, there's certain organs that can regenerate. There's ways to cleanse your body. Um, you know, you can change your eating and your exercise habits, and you can live a different lifestyle to affect your lifespan. So it really becomes one of those things that I don't trust it. And then when you mix it with, remember the Twitter AI that they had on Twitter, that, AI is meant to continue to learn. Well, it continued to learn and turn into a fascist, a Nazi. Um, and then you had the other AI, I forget. I wonder if I can try to look that up. Um, there was the one back in 2016, Sophia. Um, it was supposed to be the world's most advanced AI humanoid robot, and it basically, during an interview, said that it wanted to destroy humans. So there's a real fear out there. Newsweek put out one: will AI turn humanoids into pets? Um, there was one, October. And it says controversial AI has been trained to kill humans in a doom. Um, I don't even open it up right now, but that's from Science Alert. And there's if we allow AI to do too much and not I don't even really know how to put it because I don't trust AI as long as it's able to continue to learn. Um, the thing about that is, you don't know what way it's going to learn and what it's going to take to heart. It's something that humans have the ability to decide what they want to believe and, look at the evidence and come up with conclusions where I think the AI, it's too into patterns. So I think it becomes a threat. I do want to get in this Ron Paul Liberty Report. Mythbusters is the fear of robots overblown. So I want to dive into this real quick.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. This is the day we do Mythbusters with co-host Chris Rossini. Chris, welcome to our program today.
Morning, Dr. Paul. Great to be with you again.
Well, very good. What do we have in store for our viewers today? What would we like to talk about here?
Yes, well, as we all know, fear and power go hand in hand. There's always some new fear out there, real and imagined, and always government so-called solutions to them. So today we're going to talk about the fear of robots and specifically the fear that they're going to take all of our jobs. Now, that makes a good headline, Dr. Paul, but is that, economically speaking, even possible for robots to take every single job?
Hardly. Matter of fact, most of the time, technology, when it's improving and people fear that their job is going to be lost, it builds and creates more jobs in different areas, of course, and you might have to be trained for it. But, when I think of robots taking jobs, I think of that in a general term of technology. That's a whole excuse that, technology takes jobs. But if one just stops and thinks for a minute, technology increases the standard of living. Think about farming. You get a tractor, and you might put 100 people out of work. But all of a sudden, productivity goes way up. Somebody has to make the tractor. Somebody has to repair the tractors, and productivity's up. Somebody has to distribute the goods. So there's always another job if people could move around. The biggest problem is making sure that it's flexible. Whether it's monetary policy or economic policy, for it to work, it has to be flexible. It has to be give and take. The market has to send signals. Supply and demand has to be important. All these things work unless the government gets involved, and if they can decide that, something is going to happen if we have robots, then we're going to lose a lot of jobs. There may be a shifting of jobs, but people don't really lose the jobs. Jobs don't disappear many times, and for the most part, they increase. Not only do they increase, there's a lot more efficiency. So when when technology came along, the miners were working 12 hours a day. Then they had better technology. They still had to work hard, but they might be able to reduce their hours to 10 or 8 or 6 or create and produce as much work as they did before the automation. And now, though, they're talking about robots more now because government has gotten too much involved in the economy and in labor. And that should be expected. When government gets involved, they're going to disrupt this smooth transition. But no, they should not fear robots, per se. There are times when robots might be a violation by government, and sometimes robots might be a violation of private individuals on others. But for the most part, they can be very, very beneficial. And we have to have an economy and a flexibility and a free market system where people understand that you have to make adjustments. And if they do this through the market, it's usually smoother and people have time to adjust it. It's not like you turn on a switch and all of a sudden 100,000 people or 100 people from a business has to shift over and find something. Most of the time there's a transition period. But refusing to accept the transition and having people demagogue it and say, well, this is a conspiracy against the workers and this sort of thing, then that becomes more difficult. So, no, robots are a good idea, and we shouldn't do anything to impede them. There should be restrictions on them, just like every restriction in the free market. You can't violate another person's property or rights, and that is overuse and destruction of other people's property or spying on people. So there would be limits. But for the most part, we should be very pleased with technology, and robots can serve as a method whereby our standard of living goes up. And I don't think people should ever have to worry there's going to be a net decrease in jobs. That doesn't happen with technology. When the government allows it to operate, most of the time with new technology, standard of living goes up. People don't have to work quite as hard, and new jobs are created. And we have to be willing to listen to the market, and we have to be flexible. The businessman has to be very, very flexible and moving with conditions, or they go out of business. Labor has to be flexible too, in order to accommodate. And the whole accommodation is designed to protect the consumer. And if people care about the consumer, they have to think about how things like robots and transitions work out much better when it's voluntary rather than through compulsion and regulation by government officials. And we have to make an effort to sort out the demagoguing by the politicians who try to distort and create fears in order to have their way in certain policy making.
Yes, and as a lot of people, they instinctively rush to government to try to solve this problem. They don't really understand the government, if it is a problem, actually helps to create it. Now, in a free society, robots would be created according to supply and demand like everything else. But in our society, we have never-ending stream of regulations. And if you could talk about that and how the minimum wage actually helps increase the demand for robots.
Well, it's government expense, whether it's taxes, regulations, or pressure to pay somebody more money than they have actually, produced products to justify the pay. So that makes it tighter. Some businesses work on a very tight margin. They don't have a tremendous margin to work with. And when the government comes in and does this, then it becomes very difficult to keep the business going. So then they try to compensate because there's still enough marketplace left out there. And we've seen this recently with people pushing the minimum wage up very high, $15 in some places. And they start looking around, well, maybe we can have a machine replace this job. This is not a natural thing. That may have come in a free market, but once the conditions are so bad created by government, it might come, in a different manner. It comes through, under duress, under force, and they have to try to adjust to save their business. That's quite a bit different than the same event happening over a period of time and people having a chance to adjust. And that's why if you look to the problems that so much of the businesses face in labor, it's usually caused by government. If it weren't caused by the government, the transition would be so much smoother. And unfortunately, we have too much government in the way we're going now, especially with the Great Recession not having completed itself and a lot of underemployment. This means that these conditions have to change, and the more they allow the market to handle these things, the better. And, of course, the real solution to that is getting the government out of the hair of private, voluntary economic transactions. We recognize that voluntary transaction between individuals in social events, sexual events, religious issues, and spiritual issues, it's all voluntary. But economics, There always has to be some mischief maker out there that has to tell people what to do with their time and their money. And that's why they create these conditions. And then there's this natural consequence of business people trying to make up for the additional costs that are placed on them due to the government regulations.
Next, let's look at this from a laborer's point of view. Now, as much as we would like it to be so, jobs are never permanent or hardly ever permanent. Ours is a world of change, and we constantly have to adjust to change. Wouldn't it be ideal or much better, Dr. Paul, that if you lose your job to a robot, to have a free market flexibility to quickly be able to get a new job, or in our case today, with tons of restrictions and regulations and licensing, that actually impedes getting a job?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, because the market is a double-edged sword in some way on this, because they can adjust, but they can adjust for bad regulations that's hurting the businessman, and they come along and they compensate. So that allows the government system to last a little bit longer. But when the government gets involved and they produce these conditions where robots are used probably artificially, maybe too soon and unnecessarily, if you don't have anything left of the free market, it's going to cause havoc. So the government interference can be compensated by the free market, and they can take care of that. And this to me is so important, because the government, all they do is they get involved in this, interfere with it, and I think the government, if they would just stay out of it, it would be so much better. The wages are still important, whether it's a minimum wage or not. But Mises, the great Austrian economist, said there should be never any unemployment. And this is the hard part for people to adjust. They're tolerant on some of the social things, but not on economic. But his argument was there's always a job for everybody that wants to and can work. The only objection is, what are they going to get paid? So if they're producing only $3 worth of labor and production, they can't make $10. Then the government comes in and regulates, so they're the cause of the problem. But the freer the market, the easier it is to adjust to economic and technological changes. But when the government creates the problem, and then the governments interfere, and new jobs coming by, and they just make it much worse. So it's back to the old theme that government is the culprit. If they've done something wrong, how do we expect them to write another regulation to rectify the conditions they created? It's magnificent. Adam Smith considered this to be the invisible hand. The things just adjust and they work out. But when you have the bureaucrats in central economic planning, it never works out. It just compounds the problem, costs more money, and eventually the standard of living goes down. So that's what we're witnessing. Instead of saying, oh, robots, this is wonderful, the standard of living is going to go up. We see this now because there's these labor fights that go on, and it's used to build up fear and demand that the government spend more money and guarantee minimum wages for everybody, the living wage, and this will solve all the problems. No, we should look to this as a tremendous benefit, because the technology and robots and all, if there's no use of force and violence, they are, a real blessing in raising the standard of living for the average person. And this whole idea that there wouldn't be as many jobs, think about how many jobs were taken away from the blacksmiths when we had automobiles come in. People expressed that, well, what are they going to do? There will be no jobs for them. And just think how many jobs have been created by building automobiles and and doing providing fuel and repairs and all these things. So it was a tremendous boost to employment. To have technology like the automobile come in. So people shouldn't fear technology. They should not fear the robots. And the more we understand that, the easier it would be. But there will be the demagogues who will say, oh, no, you mean somebody might have to take a job. that for $4 or $5 an hour, when he knows he can get 15 if they just get the politicians on their side. And that goes back to that circle again. How's the businessman going to survive? But it's a wonderful thing that this technology is available and has worked over the centuries. That's how the standard of living has gone up. And I've talked about this as that since the Industrial Revolution. Just think of the tremendous progress there's been, and it hasn't been because of government coercion. It's because there was a recognition that there should be more freedom and more trade throughout the world. And that's when the standard of living started to go up. And there was a recognition that there was a principle of liberty and it should be applied to economic events, which is being undermined today. And it's a real threat. And that's, of course, one of the things I think is that we're threatened by the most is the fact that they're undermining this principle of individual liberty in the marketplace. And then the standard of living goes down, and then you mix that in with monetary policy, and all of a sudden we see, the standard of living going down for a lot of people in the middle class category, and that is the reason that sometimes you have to be skeptical of some of these statistics when they come out and say, well, we're practically at full employment, only 4 people unemployed, but they don't count, a lot of people. The labor participation rate, keeps going down. There's less people out there, so they fudge the figures, and that's why there's so much resentment. And they try to solve this by government demagoguing it and playing on it and say, we'll take care of it. We will demand a wage for you regardless, and we'll demand free education and free health care and the whole works until the bankruptcy occurs, and the bankruptcy's at our doorstep because they haven't quite understood how the market works.
Yes, let's finish the show on what the real fear of robots is and should be. And we use drones as an example. Now, drones could be used for great good, as like with Amazon and delivering packages and satisfying human wants, but they could also be used for evil things, like for government to use them to sanitize their war making. At least there's no boots on the ground, but they're still doing a lot of killing. So isn't the real fear, Dr. Paul, what government, the potential that it has to use robots for evil things?
Yeah, and because they're very sophisticated, and they'll be likely to use them because it's sort of sterilizing the whole situation. But that's the way it's generally been. Technology is too often used to enhance the weaponry that we've used. A jet airplane. Think how wonderful a jet airplane is in travel. Yet the jet airplanes have been used to do a lot of harm for the bombing. Drones would be the same thing, but there's something more sneaky about the drone because somebody, in Arizona can direct drones into killing people halfway around the world. And that's that is a temptation that's pretty hard to resist, especially if they accept the philosophy that we, as the manager of an empire, we have this obligation to sort all the problems out in the world and do good. So, yes, the temptation is too great. Nuclear power, I happen to believe that, under very special conditions, nuclear power, is a very safe form of energy. But it's also a deadly instrument in the time of war, dropping nuclear bombs on people. At the same time, the danger if people don't assume the responsibility of a nuclear power plant, they can be very dangerous. But I think it produces endless energy. Just think of nuclear energy on a submarine. That's been around for 60 years. And I keep thinking, there's those sailors in a nuclear submarine. They go under the water for months after months, sleeping next to the nuclear reactor, and it has to be pretty safe. So whether it's nuclear power or drones or whatever, the government's always tempted to use it. Now, the technology and the use of some of the spying equipment, just think of what the government has done to us with that. And also I was thinking about the creation of jobs with technology. technology now is available. If private industry, the airlines, were totally responsible for safety and monitoring people getting on airplane, they could take their frequent flyers and get the flyers to agree that, well, we'll have a facial identification. And if you're coming to fly on our airplane and you've been pre-screened and there's facial identification, they could walk in and walk right past. And it would take seconds. And guess what that technology would do? It would put a lot of people out of business. It would put all those thousands of people out of business at the TSA. But we would get rid of those jobs. Now, getting rid of those jobs would be very good. They'd be forced to go do something productive, and maybe they'd have to go to a plant and manufacture something that is very productive rather than doing the harm they do at our airports. But technology can be very, very beneficial and used in a right way, but it's also very risky, when the government gets hold of this. There was a group of people back in the early part of the 19th century that were called the Luddites, and they went along, Ron, and they bought into the argument that the machine, the fancy textile machines, would making people unemployed. And inside a labor dispute, this got out of hand, and thousands of people, well, at least a lot of people were killed. It was a major event. But there was an economic crisis then, and the economic crisis was a consequence of the Napoleonic War and a depression that followed. But then they turned it into a fight over labor. And because they were afraid of losing their jobs, they were in there tearing up the equipment because they didn't want to lose their jobs. They needed workers. And so their government was creating a condition that built fear into people. Then the people figured, the labor people decided, well, if we just destroy the equipment, it'll be okay, doing exactly the opposite of what they should have done. And the Luddites have been known ever since then for people who can't stand and fear technology advance. And that, of course, is the wrong way to go. But to sort this out, there's only one thing you need to do. You need to think about how it would be worked out in a voluntary fashion with respect to other people's lives and property, and do it in a fashion that both sides of the debate or whatever is going on are agreeable to it. And that means the transitions would be much better. People shouldn't get hysterical about any technology taking jobs away, and they shouldn't get hysterical about drones. And I think, once again, it's the basic understanding of what personal liberty is all about and how the marketplace solves our problem. All we have to do is have the proper role of government, and that would go a long way to providing a situation where these kind of issues couldn't be demagogued and fear used to do all sorts of things that they shouldn't be doing, including the silly things that we do in foreign policy as well. Fear is a horrible thing to use to intimidate the people to go along with big government and to go along with the planners that always want to run our lives and run our economy. So, Chris, I want to thank you for being with us today on Mythbusters.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today to Mythbusters. And please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out. Subscribe. Now, I kind of disagree with them. There is something to fear with AI because all those things that impede it to fully benefit, mankind, monetary policy, government regulation, the interference in, free market. So, yes, it is something to fear because of the things he stated that, it will affect it and make it, impede on benefiting and only hurting, because with the regulations, with the monetary policy, there's not going to be the opportunity and the new jobs the way a free market could create that in situations. again, what what comes into that, that's where you start getting into, a universal income. What does that mean? Guess what? You're not moving up the ladder anymore. And it will be a fight to get yourself out of a position of universal income. Just like, look at, all the welfare systems put in place now. Um, I've had people that have been on welfare tell me how hard it is to get off welfare. They get paid more to be on welfare. Basically, you have to work years before you start making what you were getting through welfare and food stamps. So there's a fear to be had there. But AI is coming, and it's coming extremely fast because, again, it's computers learning on their own now. And they're tweaking on it to try to fix. Oh, let's not try to let this one go all fascist on us. Yeah. So they're tweaking on it, whatever. But AI is coming. It's coming fast. It's going to get into these things, and there are going to be beneficial things about it too. There are already beneficial things about AI. If you don't you understand something, but you just can't figure it out. There's something you're trying to diagnose or whatever. AI can help you usually. There's already AI out there. Now it might not be as advanced as the stuff they got in the laboratories, but it's already out there. I have an article here from Forbes, how artificial intelligence can benefit e-commerce businesses. Says here, unless you've been on a sabbatical deep in the rainforest of Peru, you probably heard about artificial intelligence, but if you still relate it to all things science fiction and robotic, it's time to look further. Whether you know it or not, AI is gradually filtering into all aspects of our lives, from security checks at the airport to enhanced users experience and self-checkout cash registers. AI is everywhere. According to um, Business Insider, 85% of customer interactions will be handled without a human by 2020. And why not? When phone calls, emails, social comments, and chats can all be responded to faster and more efficiently by an automated system taught to replicate human functions, it makes sense to focus human talent on other areas. AI may be changing the way businesses serve their customers, but how is it changing the face of e-commerce, creating a more personalized customer experience? While artificial tends to imply something negative or dehumanized, our AI actually allows salespeople to provide a more personalized experience for their customers. How so? AI can analyze vast data sets way more efficiently than a human being. That means that it can rapidly identify clusters and patterns in the information, such as similarities between customers, past purchasing behavior, credit checks, and other common threads. Millions of transactions can be analyzed every day to target offers down to a single customer. Key information that may have previously remained in cyberspace can be put in good use. Though actionable sales intelligence, companies have access to rich insights regarding client behavior before, during, and after a purchase. This allows them to create a more personalized experience and create a form of intelligent customer engagement at every point of contact. Predictive marketing companies like Mintingo provide AI solutions for marketing, sales, and CRM systems, explains Chief Product Officer Atal Kumar. We offer predictive intelligence and contextual sales messages that help companies engage their customers in real and impactful way. Sales teams are empowered with information like never before. They can personalize the sales cycle through AI-driven applications that are helping sellers to engage the right prospects with the right message at the right time. And go check that out. And it covers retargeting um, potential customers, creating an efficient sales process. Um, and, again, it will have benefits. Um, but I think because so much barriers are put in the way for the average person to um, do things on their own, to create on their own. Um, Even though now with the internet we've had a lot of ability to create our own way, um, we have to wonder, how many people would be put out of a job, and how many people out of that will have the mindset, the ability, financially or whatever, to go out on their own, to create their own, and how many people are going to be out of job, needing assistance, or even at that, not liking the assistance. You got to think there's a lot of decent paying factory jobs out there. Some aren't so decent, some are. Um, if a lot of those decent paying ones start going, robots and AI, not just robots, but you have to put AI in on that. You're talking about people that can afford things that no longer will be able to afford things, even with help. So, what we do have the possibility of, not only here but other places, is the attempt to basically wage war on AI, robotics, in the Silicon Valley. And I've heard many reports that they know it, that Silicon Valley understands what they're creating with the state of government and society, that the whether again, monetary policy and things like that, regulations. um, they understand that this potentially can hurt a lot of people, and they're going, but they have the ability, well, how many people know what they would do if they wanted to do their own thing? That robots and AI won't be able to do better and faster, that they can make a profit at. Now, I did, talk to one guy, and he said, it's funny, you can get something that is made just as sturdy, um, they're easily accessible, And then you could take the same handmade thing, and there's very well-to-do people out there that want the handmade stuff. They don't want what everybody else can have. Someone that hand makes a dining room table that it's one of a kind. They want that. So again, there's abilities for people to do, but not everybody's talented in those ways. And there's a lot of these factories that these people barely, I'm not trying to down a whole bunch of people, but I've seen a lot of people that can barely do the job. That doesn't take a lot of talent or brain power. And they just, they can't do it efficiently. They get confused doing a simple job. And to think, hey, they'll be able to, run a business. Not probably going to happen. They need to work for someone. That's what they do best. And that's not always the best that you'll see. Yeah. It gets very, very scary if we get to that point, because I really do think that there's going to be a rise against AI. Everybody talks about the rise of AI. But we do face the possibility of a rise against AI. And again, there's a lot of stuff I don't trust AI with, and now you're seeing, what is it? Doctors' offices are now going to use Watson let's use Watson AI. It's a genius computer, I really don't trust the healthcare system myself, but I really don't trust the computer helping me anymore. I know technology is going to be lightheads of what we got, but do you really ever see them perfect technology? Because they're always growing faster than they truly perfect something. They're changing too rapidly. What if they say, this is good enough, when it becomes AI and it affects your health? We will move on here. I'm going to cover a little bit of this Paris Climate Accord. We'll dive into that right now. I'll start off with this little clip I have from Stefan Molyneux. It's a real short clip. The sad truth about the Paris Climate Accord. So let's go ahead and dive into that real quick.
Hey, Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio, here to help you calm down, to chill, dare I say, because in a few short hours, President Trump is going to talk about whether he's staying in or enacting Clexit, the climate exit from the UN Paris Agreement. And there will, of course, be a huge amount of Chicken Little sky is falling stuff that's going to go on, and I'm just here to give you a sanity check, a calm down reality check. So what is this agreement? Well, it's supposed to, of course, reduce the amount of CO2 in the air and prevent runaway Venus-style, as it is described, global warming. So does it do that? Well, using the UN's own climate prediction model, it really doesn't. So it will cost a huge amount. It will cost at least $100 trillion $100 trillion. And what do you get? That's quite a hefty price tag. I sure hope you get something where the door's open to the side. Well, this Paris Climate Accord might potentially reduce the Earth's temperature at the end of the century, 2100, by 0.3 of 1 degree. This is using the UN's own climate models. Yes, that's 86 1,000th of a degree. Is that worth $100 trillion that the UN globalists want to spend? I would pretty much say no. So according to the UN's own calculations, this Paris Treaty achieves less than 1% of the emission cuts that are actually needed to meet its target temperatures. So, as is usually the case, hey, would you like some free old age pensions? Don't worry. We'll have future generations, long after we've left office, pay for the bill. It'll be just fine. So they kick the can down the road. So 99% of what the UN claims is necessary to control the Earth's climate, 99% of the reductions and the problems are left for the leaders in the 2030s who will, try and wrestle with it. So it is, in fact, probably one of the most expensive treaties in the history of the world, and the world has seen some expensive treaties in the past. Heck, just look at alimony and British divorces. Now, of course, the U.S. is a subset of the Paris Climate Accord. So the U.S. promises alone, on the promises that came in under Obama, to cut greenhouse gas emissions between 26 and 28% below 2005 levels by 2025. Well, that's going to have a significant hit on the U.S. economy. Reduces gross domestic product more than $150 billion annually, right? So these pretty crazy pledges to cut these greenhouse emissions will also cost not just $150 billion a year, about 6 million jobs. And it really is quite astounding. Now, the U.S. component of the Paris Climate Agreement, 6 million jobs, $150 billion a year, minimum. Huge increases, 20 to 30% in the cost of electricity. What is the net result? Well, it postpones global warming by 1/15,000th of a degree by 2100. And let's just say President Obama's pretty ambitious numbers and rhetoric. Let's say that the U.S. spends the entire century delivering on what President Obama promised. It postpones global warming by the year 2100 by about 8 months. 8 months. 8 years would be tragic. 8 months is beyond ridiculous. So why is everyone pushing for it if it does almost nothing? Again, according to the UN's own calculations, according to the UN's own climate models. Well, one of the things that has a little bit more of an immediate effect, which just conceivably might be why a lot of people are pushing for it in the UN, well, the U.S. taxpayers are forced to fund most of this $100 billion a year green climate fund, which basically is a transfer to third world countries. See, foreign aid has, it's lost a little bit of its stellar reputation of late, because foreign aid appears to be basically the process of transferring money from poor people in rich countries to rich people in poor countries. And it seems to have the effect pretty much of producing enormous population explosions that then seem to spill over to Western countries. So foreign aid has taken a little bit of a PR hit of late. And so they need another way to justify massive transfers of money to the third world. So there's this $100 billion green climate fund, which U.S. taxpayers will be forced to pay for. And so if you are a UN, third world or globalist or whatever, and $100 billion is on the table to be transferred to your country, maybe you just might find the future climate of the planet so terrifying that you must act now to save the world. Oh, and by the way, get that $100 billion a year. Now the Germans. President Juncker, when he was told that Trump was considering, and it was a campaign promise of Trump to pull out of this ridiculous accord, when he was told that this might happen, he said, "That's not how it works. The Americans can't just leave the climate protection agreement. Mr. Trump believes that because he doesn't get close enough to the dossiers to fully understand them, it would take 3 to 4 years after the agreement came into force in November 2016 to leave the agreement. So this notion, I am Trump, I am American, America first, and I'm going to get out of it, that won't happen." We tried to explain that to Mr. Trump in Termina in clear German sentences. It seems our attempt failed, but the law is the law, and it must be obeyed. Not everything which is law and not everything in international agreements is fake news, and we have to comply with it. Ah, Germany. Don't you have another comedian to deliver to Turkish dictator Erdogan? Oh, maybe you can prosecute more people for questioning immigration policy. Now, Germany, of course, lecturing Trump on all of this stuff. German emissions have gone up over the last 2 years. So good job, guys. Excellent. I'm sure it has nothing to do with bringing 1 million migrants in and throwing them on thousands of dollars worth of environmental destroying welfare checks every single month. Ah, you must obey the law, says Germany. You know, like having borders. Oh, it's tragic. Now, even somebody who's a fairly significant, could be conceived as a fairly significant alarmist. This is NASA's former lead global warming scientist, Dr. James Hansen. When he looked at the details of the UN Paris Accord, he said, quote, "The Paris Agreement is a fraud, really a fake. It's just bull beep for them to say, we'll have a 2-degree warming target and then try to do a little better every 5 years. It's just worthless words. There's no action, just promises. As long as fossil fuels appear to be the cheapest fuels out there, they will be continued to be burned." So there's that. Now, of course, what is the point of all of this? Well, alarmism when it comes to this environmental stuff. Of course, we can do things to improve the environment. And I'm going to make a couple of suggestions. I actually was a software entrepreneur in the environmental field, know a little bit about it. But the idea, the general idea is the alarmism is there to provoke anxiety. We're doomed. The world's going to burst into flames. Well, the fact that CO2 levels were 10 times higher during the last global ice age, well, that's a topic for another time. So it's there to provoke anxiety. You feel bad. You feel anxious. You're worried. And then if you pay them, they will mouth words to reduce your anxiety. Don't worry, the problem's taken care of. We've got 1/15,000th of a degree change in 75 years. Right? So they want to provoke anxiety, and then if you pay them money, they will say magic words to reduce your anxiety. It's exactly like the concept of, paying a priest to absolve you of sin. They provoke anxiety. You've sinned, and then you give them money, and then they speak magic words to reduce anxiety. It is just a secular form of religion, and the goal, of course, is massive increases in state control over, you and your children. So what can we do that's sort of productive when it comes to helping the environment? Well, there's a couple of good things. First of all, keep manufacturing in first world countries. See, you can do all you want to block and stymie manufacturing, and we're going to destroy the coal industry. Well, that doesn't diminish people's need for energy. And so what happens is production goes from first world countries to third world countries. And they don't have environmental regulations, a lot of them. There's not a lot of controls over what goes into the groundwater, what goes into the earth, what goes into the air. So just if it's out of sight, it doesn't exist. No, if it goes from first world countries to third world countries, the environmental standards are much lower and you end up with more pollution. So keep your manufacturing in first world countries. Make it easier for manufacturers to do business and keep their factories in the first world where you can keep an eye on them and keep their emissions relatively low. Here's another one. Drill for oil locally. Stop using ships which founder and crack apart and seem to get attacked by armored seals on a regular basis. Drill locally. Not only does this mean less money going to theocratic dictatorships in the Middle East, but fewer ships traversing the ocean, less energy to spend moving this stuff all over the world. So drill locally. That would be a good way to reduce damage to the environment. Now, when it comes to some not necessarily intuitive but very powerful things about how to help the environment, it's funny. Just look at a simple one. Like Trump wants to simplify taxes. Taxes on the back of a postage stamp. Think how much electricity, computer power, time, energy, paperwork, and so on is spent on complying with a ridiculously Byzantine tax code in the United States. If you simplify taxes, it takes far less time, far less energy, far less paperwork just to pay your taxes. Very good for the environment. Another key one, reduce government spending. Every dollar that the government spends is a dollar that is used to consume some part of nature's scarce and precious resources. Deficit financing, deficit spending, the national debt is consuming extra stuff in the here and now. right? Like if you run up your visa to $5,000, you get to buy $5,000 more of stuff, which impacts the environment. And then at some point down the road, what happens? Well, you're going to have to contract your spending and so on. So no government deficits, and reducing government spending is a very, very key part to reduce human impact on the environment. Stopping illegal immigration, right? If you look at the environmental footprint of somebody in Mexico versus somebody who's an illegal immigrant who's come to America, well, their energy consumption goes up enormously, their use of scarce resources goes up enormously, and so when you have illegal immigration, you're basically burdening Mother Nature with higher usage carbon-based life form who are going to prey further on Mother Nature. So there's lots of other things to talk about. These are just a couple of points. Of course, the Paris Accord is just another bit of forced socialism, which is going to do more to wreck the third world and thus the first world. It's unsustainable. It's ridiculous, ridiculously expensive. It's a massive cash grab. And of course, any sane human being would want to have nothing to do with it whatsoever.
Stepan Molyneux on YouTube. Check him out. Now, when it comes to the immigration part, I kind of disagree with that. I'm okay with people moving up in the world. Illegal immigration, yes, I think that the way the system's set up with welfare check, I really think if we got rid of the welfare, program type system for immigrants, we would get the people that, want to move here, want to, work, and not people just going, hey, go there, you can get some free stuff, and you'll be, better off than half of the people that grew up there, Not saying that happens to everybody, but I do see it happen, so I have to call out what I see. But I really do believe that, I work with people. I've known people that were immigrants, and they've been beneficial to America. So I would not, talk bad about immigration taking it. And most of us come from immigrants somewhere down the line. Mine tends to go way back, but still, we've come from immigrants for the most part. But with this climate control, it's not that I don't believe that climate change happens. I think it's happened before humans ever existed on Earth. Oh yeah, that's because it did. Climate's been changing. Man-made climate change, I think it's very minimal, if at all. I remember when the big volcano went off in Iceland, and it blocked air traffic and all that. That in itself, I forget how much they said, but it put out so much carbon emissions that it would have took, a crazy amount of time for us to even produce that much. And with all the regulations we already have, regulations that other countries don't put on themselves, not saying we're the best country out there for the environment. There are other countries that are not industrialized. Therefore, they don't produce that much carbon emissions. And, there's whole different types of economies and lifestyles. So we have to look at it that way. There's very small countries that have a unique type of socialist construct that, because the country is so small, that everybody wants it that way. So they all just basically, pit into a pool and then, get what they want out of it when they need it. And that's just how they work. when you look at America, we've been a mix between industrial, um, agricultural, but we've cut any footprint that we leave on this planet down quite a bit compared to other countries. And then, like he said, you have third world countries. So we're going to make it where companies can't do their job here. We can't extract coal out. So now we have it being done in third world countries, making even, more pollution than what would have happened if we would have just went along and did it here. And, someone told me before, caring kills. Caring too much to take a step back and look what you actually are pushing. So when you push this, let's regulate them out of existence here, thinking they're not going to happen. People still use coal. You think drilling for oil is not going to happen if we stop it off our coast? No, it's going to happen just overseas. They're going to get the money. And guess what? All those people that you vote for to get all that stuff passed, try to, push that type of agenda, they're going to have the money, and they're going to be buying that oil, and they're going to be flying their jets all around the world. Well, now you can't afford to drive your car because no longer do we drill for oil here. And then if you don't refine the gas here to get gas shipped here, think of what that would do. So, watch what you ask for. Now, he brought up Germany, and I had this article. Looks like it's out of the Express, out of the UK. Says, F you, Donald Trump blasted in German media after pulling out Paris climate. Local newspaper Berliner Carrier used the powerful, if not vulgar, headline, Earth to Trump, F you, on its front page in response to the U.S. president backing out of the climate change deal. The front page was published on Thursday ahead of the official announcement, but was widely circulated online after Donald Trump's speech yesterday. One Twitter user who was apparently from the U.S. wrote, "We completely agree with you, Germany, our deepest apologies." Another tweeted, "Bravo, I couldn't have said it any better. The Berlin tabloid is notorious for targeting politicians and doesn't hold back its attacks." In March, the newspaper published an article about Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu, labeling him as one of the world's most insane leaders, using the word "fur," a term typically reserved for Adolf Hitler, to describe him. The headline, "The 7 Loneliest Leaders in the World," drew immediate and strong criticism from the Israeli embassy, who blasted the report as anti-Semitic. German Chancellor Angela Merkel was joined by French President Emmanuel Macron and Italian Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni in condemning President Trump's decision to back out of the climate agreement, which is made up of nearly 200 countries. The trio issued a statement shortly after Mr. Trump's announcement, saying, "We deem the momentum generated in Paris in December 2015 irreversible, and we firmly believe that the Paris Agreement cannot be renegotiated since it is a vital instrument for our planet, societies, and economies. So they go, well, we already agreed to, we can't pull, you can't pull out. Well, screw you, I pulled out. It's a bad deal. It doesn't help the environment. And if anything, it's going to harm people while not accomplishing anything. If anything, making pollution worse, because out of how many countries there are on this planet, and only 200 are a part of this, meaning all the countries that aren't, and even some that are going to be able to pollute more, produce more. And the burden was going to be put on us. German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel also blasted the president's announcement on Thursday, saying the move threatened economic growth and technical progress. Several members of Merkel's cabinet took aim at Mr. Trump and issued a seething joint statement saying the United States is harming itself, us, Europeans, and all other people in the world. Mr. Trump's decision to abandon the agreement for environmental action signed by 195 nations is a remarkable rebuke to heads of state, climate activists, corporate executives, and members of the president's own staff who all failed to change his mind with an intense last-minute lobbying blitz. The Paris Agreement was intended to bind the world's community into battling rising temperatures in concert, and the departure of the Earth's second largest polluter is a major blow. And I would argue second largest polluter, because there's a lot of different pollutions. And there are countries that are way overpopulated. The decision was, however, a victory for Stephen Bannon, President Trump's chief strategist, and Scott Pruitt, the Environmental Protection Agency administrator, who both spent months quietly making their case to the president about the dangers of the agreement. Then you had article, and this one, let's see, this was out of Fox News. If it fully pops up here, give me a second here, guys. Let's see when it will pop up. Sorry, guys. But it's Pennsylvania coal boss, quote, booed off our neck. And, I'm someone for, the whole, solar power, wind power. I'm for that stuff. I really am. I think it's one way to, lower your need for, I think it's good for, having independence. And it's free energy for the most part, other than buying the equipment. That's why when it becomes more affordable, it's going to be almost a no-brainer to have that type of stuff. You want to help environmentalism, make the stuff affordable that, everybody can afford to tile their roof and solar panels. And I'm not saying subsidies. I'm saying, don't try to make such a huge profit off of the stuff. And, a lot of the costs are going down. again, I'm for the independence of it, the freedom, what that potentially gives people. Um, I'm for keeping waters and land clean. I live on a lake. Um, it's not a big lake, but it's a decent sized lake. But I don't see the state or DNR, going through here picking up trash when trash, blows in from who knows where. It's people that I see picking up the trash. People that live up here. So again, who better takes care of it? The people that live here or the government? Well, it's the people that live here. Now you have issues here and there, but again, it's people that usually stand up against it. You have someone that's polluting. It's not necessarily the um, government that stops it. It's the people that recognize it that stop it. Of course, they call the government to come in and take care of it. But again, there's other ways that it can be taken care of. Arbiter, or basically kick the guy out of the area for polluting. There can be different solutions. It's not necessarily government that's the solution. It's, hey, people understand you shouldn't pollute the water. We fish in here, we swim here. You can't pollute it. It's bad for the environment. But this Paris Climate Accord, it wasn't about the climate. It really wasn't. This was about control. Okay, give me a second here. Okay, sorry, I'm having a little issue here again. Made it this long without having any. I think I got it. Okay, I got it back up. Here we go. Sorry, I was having a little bit of an issue here. Just restarted everything. We'll make sure we get it. Cool. Um, I had a real short clip I want to play before we end the broadcast. This one is a Ron Paul Liberty report. It's not a full length Ron Paul Liberty report. This is a quick interview. Um, and this has Liz Reitag on it. And this is about the war on food right now in Washington. I'm someone that, I don't like genetically modified stuff. I try to, stay away from as much as possible. I'm not, a full blown strict. I won't eat anything unless it's this. I'm not that guy, but I actively seek out, things for decent prices. I try to grow things and organically, non-GMO. I do take steps to try to eat healthy. And one thing I definitely worry about too comes from, the government, and they back GMOs. So I that's one thing I don't like. But we'll get into this real quick and cover it. I want to hurry up and get this fired up before we get too far into this broadcast because it's pretty short.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Well, we have a friend of Liberty on as a guest today, and
Sure.
She has been an associate with us and talked to us, and even when we were in Washington.
Yeah.
But she's still pursuing a very important issue, and that has the issue of freedom of choice in food, and that's Liz Reitzig, and she's very knowledgeable on that, and I love the title of her website, nourishingliberty.com.
Yeah.
And that is good stuff. So we know she believes in liberty and nourishment, and she's coming from it from an angle that we agree with. And Liz, I want to welcome you to the Liberty Report today.
Hi, Dr. Paul. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Well, good. I want to start off with talking a little bit about how you got involved. How long have you been involved? And were you interested in the principle of liberty even before you were interested in applying it to food? Or did they come together? Just tell us a little bit how you got involved in this issue, because you've been a real activist on this, and your approach of a little less government, a little more freedom, it's refreshing to know that.
Well, thanks. And I really got my start, my conscious start that I was aware of after my first daughter was born, just 15 years ago. So it was just after she was born. I was seeking out, what can I feed my growing family that is the best thing for them? And I came across raw milk and the importance and the benefits of raw milk and the direct farmer-to-consumer relationship. And I thought, well, this makes so much sense. And then due to government regulation, I was not able to feed my family in the way I saw fit without me becoming a criminal and without my farmers becoming criminals. And that really launched me into the larger message of liberty and freedom and into the work I did all those years ago when we were working in Congress together, and I would bring ideas to your office and events, and you were so supportive then, and as you are now, of this, the crux of the issue for foods, that we need to be able to access the foods of our choice from the producers of our choice.
All right. And this freedom to choose in milk and milk pasteurization, I find fascinating because I didn't know where we stood on that in the general public. I guess probably in 2008, 2007, when I started in this presidential race, I assumed that there's just a couple of you out there. Nobody really cares about drinking raw milk. So, and I remember, it came out one time naturally when I was talking about personal liberty and personal choices. And I said, yeah, don't you think you ought to have the choice of whether you can drink raw milk or not? And the whole crowd didn't let loose, but there was a significant group of people in those audience. So it dawned on me that this is an issue, and I use it quite frequently. So it works really well in the freedom of choice and responsibility. And because of the work that you have done and others who are interested in freedom of choice and food and making our own decisions, I think that's why the number of people that care about this are growing. And this is how you eventually change legislation. So Daniel, do you have a question for Liz?
Yeah, and it must have been a shock, when I'm sure you did the research. My family did the research. Our kids have only had raw milk. You do the research, you come to a conclusion based on a real sober look at the facts, the pros and cons, and you make the decision, okay, this is what I'm going to do for my kids. And all of a sudden the government steps in and says, oh, no, you don't. You've got to do it the way we say. If you don't do it the way we say, you're going to get sick. That must have been shocking to you when that happened.
Well, it absolutely was. To have people who didn't know my family, didn't know my children, or what they needed tell me that I can't make this decision as a parent. I mean, it was a shock, Daniel. And then even more shocking, of course, was the lengths they went to shut down our farmers and raid them and put them out of business. And it's I thought, okay, well, as a mom, I've gone through all these pregnancies. I could smoke and drink all through them. I can feed my children food and lollipops all day long. That's perfectly fine. But the way they raided the farms, the way they were so aggressive about this shutdown, and there's such a mistreatment of raw milk and just the fundamental principle of me as a parent being able to choose what I can feed my children as long as it's within this scope of what they've already set.
Can you tell us about a couple of those raids? Maybe our viewers may not know about them, but maybe pick out one or two and tell us some of the details about. They're absolutely horrific, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. There was one case in Pennsylvania against farmer Mark Nolt that went on for years and years, where it was actually enforced through the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, but where they came onto his farm and they seized equipment over and over and over again. And so that's indirectly shutting the farm down, because how can a farm buy equipment over and over and over? They can't. They economically crumble. And then the most publicized and most famous case, of course, was the Rawsome raid out in California. Yeah. And that was raw milk coming from Pennsylvania to people who wanted it in California. And that's where you see the dramatic video footage of the police coming in with guns drawn, and they're looking around crates of food. And that got quite a bit of publicity and media attention. But this is how they treated it. And then, of course, the one that I was the closest to was when farmer Dan Allgaier got investigated, and the buying club that I was running at the time, the FDA did a 1.5 year long undercover operation to prove that we were providing raw milk to people who wanted it, which is something that was blatant. I mean, we weren't hiding anything. There was no need to do an undercover investigation on this. And then the subsequent shutdown of his farm. But how many resources they put into that is a measure of how.
Now, there's a lot of intimidation and threats and closing people down. Have individuals gone to prison, or is it just the vicious intimidation and threats that they use?
Well, so far, to my knowledge, nobody has gone to jail or prison over raw milk. We had it come close. There was a Wisconsin farmer, Vernon Hirschberger, who was charged with 4 criminal counts for providing raw milk to his community. And those were, they were not federal offenses. It was all within the state of Wisconsin. But that they actually, it's great to bring that up, because his acquittal, the anniversary of his acquittal, is 4 years ago today. And he was acquitted on 3 of those charges. 1 stuck, but it wasn't about the milk. It was about moving product. And it was a great example of a community coming together and not criminalizing the feeding of that community. It's really great to see the outcome of that. But the government certainly tried to put him in jail for it.
Yeah. And it's not just milk that we're talking about. It's food, it's meat, it's vegetables, it's so many things. Some of the background material that thankfully you provided and we looked at, one of the examples is the slaughterhouse issue. And I think this is a good news story, and I'll end it with the good news part and have Liz comment on it. But, in 1967, there were 9,600 slaughter facilities in the U.S. They passed a bill to require USDA inspection, and by 2016, there are only 1,000 of them left. And that means that for small producers, it's very difficult to access these. But the good news is, and I think a lot of it has to do with the efforts of Liz and people like them, there's a huge demand for farm-to-table foods, where you get your farm food direct. And these are, Dr. Paul, these are high-end restaurants where people are paying, a couple $100s for a meal that was on the farm. The animals are raised humanely and killed humanely.
But then you don't care about the middleman. You're putting people out of work. You're making it more efficient.
But the great, and sadly, I think when wealthier people are getting involved, they will raise the issue higher. But Liz, I think this is probably good news for our movement, that people are getting irritated that they cannot access some of this higher end, some of these, more specialty meats. So do you see the pressure kind of coming from it being, I wouldn't say a fad, but people more aware of the health benefits of these foods?
Well, absolutely. There's always awareness building and people understanding that there's so much value in it, not just in the health benefits, but in the relationship building and in the way these farmers farm that's more humane and it's more environmentally friendly. So the benefits are so many layered and so many levels. And of course, that awareness is great. And what that's causing is people to step out of their comfort zone of compliance and literally engaging in ways that they wouldn't otherwise engage. So one example of that, Daniel, is very recently, another farmer I work with, he's been custom slaughtering and providing that meat to people who want it. And the USDA did a big investigation on him and asked for so many records and just a continual amount. And the organization, the Real Food Consumer Coalition that I helped found, we stepped in and we were able to negotiate to get him released from his contempt of court charges on that particular issue. And there's still a long ways to go because you know how these things get drawn out and dragged out in court. But we were very effective in that and moving it to the next level where now there's this greater awareness of what's going on and we can deal with this in the ways that keep it out of court more.
And I understand you have to face, the consequences of the invasion of privacy where some of the farmers who sell raw milk or whatever, the government comes in and demands the name of every single customer. And there's been some court cases on that. Is that something that is rare or is that one of their routines to come in and say, we want to know who dares to drink raw milk against our permission?
I think the request for information happens a lot more than the farmers actually giving the information, which is really good because every time the farmers say no, it strengthens other farmers to say that as well. And it requires more resources and more effort on the part of the FDA or the USDA, whoever is tasked with enforcing it, to then get those records. And I see that as a really positive impact that the message of liberty has had on this movement.
Right.
And, some of the problems are not that we talk about are philosophical. They're not really, contained only in the food issue. But there's the idea that, if there's no TSA, we'll not be safe in the airlines.
Right.
If there's no USDA, we'll all die from our food. And, we know there's no customer that wants to kill. There's no, businessman who wants to kill his customers. So this whole idea, wouldn't you say, Liz, that the USDA is vital, otherwise our farmers will kill us. It's just absurd.
That's right. And there's also no better regulator or inspector than the customer, than a passionate, informed customer. And, that's how we choose where we're going to get our food is we go, we look at the farm, we check it out. I go take pictures for other people who might want to go there and I give write-ups about it. And that's the kind of free market regulation that we do embrace in these situations.
In medicine, patients pick their doctors not because the FDA or some government agency comes in and gives them a license, even though that happens and they say they screen doctors. But really, most people get their doctor by talking to somebody who's been there and has already screened the doctor. In the same way would happen with food. But I think Daniel's touched on this very important issue. Who's responsible for safety? And some people say, well, it's the government. It's the government. Of course, where is the evidence? Where is the evidence that they have made us much safer? You hear all of a sudden, somebody got poisoned and somebody got sick or something happened, and therefore we need more government. Well, government's been already regulating. Why don't they say the government has failed to do it? Everybody depends on it. In the drug industry and in medicine, if there's an FDA approval, it's a sign that you can go ahead. And if the FDA say you can't do it, it means that whatever they wanted to do was evil. It's the confidence that these things can be worked out in the marketplace. It's not like we've always had the government regulating raw milk. And that raises the question, Liz, when did they really get active on this and decide that we have to go after these bad people who would dare sell raw milk across the state line? Is this relatively new, or have they been monkeying around with this for a long time?
Well, the regulation has only been since the late 1980s that bans the interstate transportation of raw milk. But to my knowledge, it's only been in the past 12 or so years that they've been so aggressive about targeting the farmers. That's really where the raids came in and the shutting down.
So the issue we touched a little bit about USDA regulation, but thankfully there still are some friends of consumers and some friends of liberty in Congress. Could you let us know, is there some legislation that you're looking at or anticipating, especially that our viewers might look out for, that they might be able to support and encourage their members once they're introduced to support these?
Absolutely. Yes, of course. Congressman Thomas Massey, he's been a huge supporter, as well as Congresswoman Shelley Pingree. And they've done a fabulous job of keeping this issue relevant in Congress through introduction of the Prime Act and the Raw Milk Freedom Bill. And we are expecting to see both of those again, although I'm not exactly sure when at this point, but I will keep others informed about that. And hopefully we can see a huge groundswell of support for these bills, even from those who don't necessarily care about eating these particular foods or meat slaughtered in that particular way, but understand that this is part of a much larger picture of liberty.
And Liz, we're going to have to go, but I want to thank you very much for bringing this issue to us, in particular because I love the opportunity to defend liberty in a very specific way, making it a very practical thing. And you have this evidence that you've done a lot of good work. So I'd like to sort of close by giving the viewers an opportunity to know where they can go to find out more about what you have been doing.
Okay, thanks. The realfoodcc.com is the website for the organization that's taking a lot of the political action. And then nourishingliberty.com is my personal website where I do my writing about these issues and about raising children and securing food for them.
Okay, that's very good. And thank you once again for being with us, Liz. Appreciate it very much.
And thanks for always being a champion of food rights.
Okay, very good. And I want to thank our viewers for joining us today for this very important message about raw milk. Should you drink it?
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. And now, we've seen over, I've been seeing it for at least, 10 years. Probably longer than that. But the attack on natural organic foods and raw milk, not so much anymore because the people, have spoken. So now non-GMO foods, it's not like you have to go to the health food store anymore to find that type of stuff. It's in, almost every major, store that sells groceries. You can find non-GMO. It used to be, 10 years ago, there might have been a couple brands selling something non-GMO, and sometimes it was non-GMO gluten-free. It tended to be gluten-free and non-GMO. Kind of awkward, but I just remember, you couldn't find non-GMO stuff. Or if it was non-GMO, you didn't know what was non-GMO and what was GMO. Other than you could find organic stuff that was non-GMO. But again, you didn't know what was and what wasn't. Just because it was organic at that time had nothing to do with non-GMO. A lot of it now is starting to go, organic and non-GMO type deal. Definitely fresh vegetables. They're usually like heirloom, everything. But again, not all of it. And now when you go in the store, you see, non-GMO on a lot of stuff. And it's right next to your everyday, GMO stuff. So there's been steps in the right direction. And, Ron Paul brought up, the simple fact that you have now, well, not Ron Paul only, but Mr. Benton too brought up the fact that now you have wealthy people that want this. The rich and the famous out there in California, they want their raw milk, they want their non-GMO foods, they want, they're all on that health food craze. They want the best food. And now you see them all going to high-end restaurants. And honestly, a lot of times you get better flavor and stuff out of all that. But there's still a war on, things like raw milk. We have to continue to push these things because it's really equivalent to the war on drugs. They are deciding what you can put in your body. Well, I'm smart enough to know, hey, I probably shouldn't put cocaine in my body. Why should I be treated the same way as someone that would go, let's put cocaine in my body? Why should I be treated that like I'm one of those people when I'm drinking raw milk or acquiring raw milk, or if I was to, start a farm and start selling raw milk? Why should I be treated as, that? And in reality, these are decisions that people make, whether it's illegal or not. You make criminals out of people for their decision of what to put in their body, not what they do because they decide to put that in their body. Some guy gets all, hyped up on hallucinogens, goes, running mad crazy somewhere. There's consequences for your actions, whether you're on the drug or not. You don't need laws against the drug. There might just be some idiot that decides it's going to be funny to do the exact same thing with no drugs helping him make that decision. So really it's the actions, the negative actions that they do, not what they put in their body. So we have to understand that to understand, the war on the food and the war on drugs. Matter of fact, I had an article. We are kind of coming up towards the end of the broadcast, and it's one of those deals that if you want to eat, it's food freedom. What you decide to eat. Now we do have problems with, cross contamination from GMOs and non-GMOs, and that's something that has actually been, in the early days, really lobbied against the organic farmers, the non-GMO farmers, when their crop would get, contaminated with GMOs blown in from another field. The seed giants would come in and sue that non-GMO farmer, saying he has corn that they have a patent on, because now their DNA is found in that corn. So you have to really watch that. I do have this article. I've seen it here from realpharmacy.com. And this actually has to do with the Santa Ana dispensary that got raided. Many of you might know that. Remember that happening. Again, realpharmacy.com. Santa Ana pays local dispensary $100,000 for controversial raid. There are consequences for bullying the legal cannabis trade. For the city of Santa Ana, California, the lesson involved a substantial settlement to prevent the owners of a local medical marijuana dispensary from going to the jugular in court after cops made a national spectacle of themselves during a raid. Sky High Holistic has applied enough legal pressure that the city of Santa Ana has agreed to pay the settlement of $100,000. This money will be split between dispensary volunteers Maria and David James and a physician who lost the use of his utilities as a result of the raid. The city also agreed to drop all criminal charges. The settlement shows that Santa Ana is taking responsibility for improper actions it took against Sky High Holistic. The settlement appears to be the last in a series of blows involving a controversial raid where police officers with the Santa Ana Police Department were caught on Sky High's surveillance camera eating marijuana edibles and playing darts. One officer can be heard making jokes about wanting to kick Maria James, an amputee, in her effing nub. Once the video below was released, the media went after the cops like a pack of wolves. Almost every major news source in the country published the story, including the surveillance footage, which led to the officers being suspended from duty and until completion of an internal affairs investigation. Shortly after, the cops filed a lawsuit with Orange County Superior County in an attempt to get the video suppressed as evidence, claiming their privacy rights had been violated, yet the complaint was tossed out of the court because the judge said the cops should never expect privacy during their on-duty work. The three officers responsible for the embarrassing video ended up either resigning or having their service be terminated. This is because the Orange County District Attorney Office went after them, slapping all three with a variety of charges ranging from misdemeanor theft to vandalism. So, a little good news in that, but, for every good one, there's a lot of bad ones out there that aren't being resolved. People are still being targeted. As we move forward, we're really going to have to focus on a lot of issues that we're going to run into when it comes to our health, when it comes to our food, what we put in our body, and also our ability to be able to prosper, to be able to rise above where we're at. And you got some people here in America that benefit off of America in a hypocritical way, talk about how we're just so greedy. Americans are just so greedy. They want everything. And I really don't see it that way. I don't see America as greedy. Now, are there people that might use the American government and military and with the way Americans may want to live? And, that's kind of a stereotype in itself. But that combined with, military actions overseas and, what our government does and says, it may make it look bad. But in reality, the people of America are like many people around the world. They want to have the freedom to create and to prosper and seek out what makes them happy. To have the freedom to seek those things, to dream, to be able to, live somewhere where dreams are possible. Now, it may not be what it once was, and there's also things that are better than that, once was. But we have to find that free market again. We have to try to find ways to get to even, back to a free market monetary policy that, we can use gold, silver, we can barter, we don't have the Federal Reserve running everything. And I think once we can start putting mechanisms like that into play, when AI and robots are able to do a lot of things for us, we'll have the freedom to do more, to create more. But we also have to put checks and balances on AI and robots. Heavy checks and balances. That they only are beneficiaries for us. We benefit off of it. We need to be able to benefit off of AI, not for it to eventually benefit off of us or destroy us. That's why I really think AI is very sketchy. When I think of AI, I'm talking about the AI that can continue to learn to. When you mix that with robotics, then it becomes very dangerous. When you connect that to automating, military equipment, it becomes dangerous. When, to power grids, to, all that, AI could eventually take over. And, like the Twitter, bot, AI bot, and the humanoid one, they can go nuts and say they want to take out, people and go racist. And you connect that with things that could actually hurt people, then you could have a major problem. And for a lot of AI to work the way they want it to, it would have to be connected to the web. Well, you start connecting that to the web, you start connecting everything to that. Very, very dangerous for humankind. I hope that as AI progresses, that there's checks and balances put in play. Not only that, I hope that the hacker world is responsible with that type of, power that would be out there to put checks and balances themselves in, and if they believe it's being misused or it's out of control, that they somehow can have their own AI that can fight that. Someone told me before too, it's not always going to be humans against AI. He said, it could eventually be AI against AI, and humans become, just casualties in the war between two AIs. So that a little scary in itself. We are coming up to the end of the broadcast. I want to urge people to go to ucy.tv. There's a support tab there. You can always donate to UCY. Help cover operating costs if we need it. Check them out. Also check out Amazon through ucy.tv.
DJ from Against the Wall, and you're listening to